Hello everyone, I'm Eric. I work at Penguin. And today we're going to have a conversation about brand and branding. So brand used to be a dirty word in our industry. Now, as recently as 2009, there was a blog post from IFBook, the Institute for the Future of the Book, which gave some advice to publishers that we should embrace branding, particularly our corporate brands or imprints, in order to fight competition from other consumer brands, namely Amazon. Now, the response to this post was quite emotional, but overwhelmingly the support seemed to fall on, no, we need to focus on the individual book, the ISBN, rather than the author, the series, or even a publisher imprint. In the same vein, publishers, until recently, who really embraced brands, those who had big business-to-business publishing deals, or who created books behind consumer products brands, entertainment brands, were kind of not really thought of as part of our world. They were thought of as promotional, mass market, more dirty words. The thing is, given all the changes to our industry, to media and entertainment that we've all been talking about today and we'll hear more about in later sessions, I think our views have completely changed and totally turned around. I think we now realize that brand and branding are powerful tools for acquisition, for marketing, sales, and maybe even survival. At Penguin, we've always focused on brand and branding informs much of everything that we do. It's part of our history. We think about branding when it comes to live events, it comes to marketing materials, point of sale, visual idents for our apps, for our TV and film ventures. We also think about our brand beyond the book and how we can take it to consumers in new and exciting and hopefully unexpected ways. And I think it's a huge compliment that people outside Penguin will take our branding and reimagine games, movies, even our competitors' books as if they were published in the Penguin brand, in the Penguin style. So I feel personally very privileged to be sort of a custodian and to have worked with Ladybird, Puffin, and Penguin, which are consumer brands in their own right, and also our corporate identities, corporate logos. But I always wonder, sort of, if we were Disney, if we were the BBC, how would we have treated our branding differently as an industry? So today we have a panel of experts around me who come from the worlds of advertising, consumer products, and also strategic planning and design. They all have strong views about branding and how our industry could and should use it for success. So, to start off, I'd like each of you guys to introduce yourself, tell us a bit about who you are and what you do, and maybe answer the question to start off with, what is branding? So, Neil, do you want to start?
Yeah, hi. So I'm Neil Witten, and I run an agency called Byte Studio. We specialize in building user-centered systems and products and websites, and we do a lot of work around the publishing sector. So to answer the question around what is branding, I think if we look back to the source of branding and where it came from, back in the day, branding existed really just to mark cattle. So you just stamp a hot iron on a sheep, on a cow, and that would identify that cow as being yours. It's probably moved on a bit since then, but fundamentally it's really about identifying your product, and then I think in modern day it's really about communicating your set of values to an audience and connecting with the consumer.
My name is Bachem. I'm a partner at a small firm called LittleBig Partnership. We help brands better connect with children and young people, but I've been working in the media marketing space for about 15-20 years with the likes of Disney and Xbox and other larger media companies. From a branding point of view, I think from my point for this conference, I think it's about helping consumers make future purchase decisions, whether that's be words, design, whatever form branding takes, but ultimately it's helping them make decisions of the future in terms of what books to buy, which then makes it worth investing in and in building for the future, whether that be around an author or a series or an imprint or an overall publisher.
Afternoon, my name's Oliver Dyer. I'm the Managing Director of SKEW Studio. SKEW is a creative agency. We work primarily for the entertainment industry, and we deal mostly with brands and brand extension that that is taking written, published, or broadcast media from page or screen onto shelves or into experiences. I think brands really are actually about a promise or an idea or a set of principles. And then, so branding is really about creating and developing something that is tangible, that communicates that idea to people in a way that they can relate to and communicate to other people and share and ultimately buy into. And just to pick up on the cattle analogy, that is absolutely true. And the reason that started and the reason that became powerful is because, of course, how do you tell two different animals apart? It's really difficult. And people buying cattle would want to know the provenance of the animal, and it became really important to be able to tell what that provenance was. And there's really no difference between choosing between two different animals than, say, choosing between two different types of sugared water.
So, Oliver, we'll start with you. And I think the way you work with brand, you work with a lot of entertainment companies, and it's when we've had discussions, it's always been about how you make things distinct. Is there anything that can you tell us more about that? And I'm particularly thinking of something like Charlie Bear, which is a children's entertainment brand, and how you guys were able to make it distinct and kind of stand out and actually be a brand rather than something generic.
Does anybody know Charlie Bear? Has anybody seen it? So who's got kids? Okay, that makes it slightly harder. So Charlie Bear, he's a bear. There's lots of teddy bears in toy shops. So within the industry, there's a concern that straight away, right there, it makes it harder to make this particular character ownable and to be able to shout out to children and parents in the aisles. So really what we did was to read the scripts, watch the show, and try and understand what makes the show work, what makes the stories work, and to try and embody that into something real, into some packaging or into some marketing and into a logo. And there's one key element where the character goes from his reality into a kind of an imagined reality. And so it's really picking up on it really comes down to brand essence, to try and find out what the heart of what it is that the people who are consuming this media, what it really resonates with them. And like I say, to turn that into something tangible.
Cool. And Oliver, you work with a lot of entertainment companies, and Neil specifically, you and the agency you set up has had a lot to do with publishers. So what sort of advice and sort of work have you been doing with publishers around brand and branding?
So I think it's pretty clear that publishing is moving from a B2B business model to direct-to-consumer. And I think if we're honest, most publishers aren't really set up to deal directly with a consumer. The kind of the branding and the model that's come before is historic, and it hasn't really been thought through specifically to try and identify with a consumer and to communicate a set of values. And I think also there's this idea that, as you touched on at the beginning, Eric, that what exactly is the brand from the publisher's perspective? You know, is it the author? Is it a book? Is it the imprint? Is it the overarching parent company? And also, what's the purpose of the brand? So they're the questions that we've really been posing. And I think there isn't an obvious answer, is the first point. But I think there certainly is a need for publishers to start to look at moving to something that's more consumer-facing, something that's more consistent.
You mean particularly with their corporate brands?
Yeah, very much so. I think what we're finding is that there is a real need for publishers to make that connection with the end consumer, and also to start to act more as a kind of conduit to curate. So to use the brand to represent what it is fundamentally that publisher is about, what their offering is.
Does the consumer care who publishes a book? I mean, if there was a series, is it about the series, is the author? Do you guys think that actually the consumer cares?
I think that's a really, really good point. I think fundamentally no. But I think where a publisher does a very good job, and I use that...
Should they? I guess is the thing.
I think they should. I think if the publisher is acting as a really relevant curator of content, when we look at discoverability and the challenges there, I think if the publisher does a really good job of curating good content, then it's really useful for the consumer to be able to associate with that.
Right.
I think from my point of view, I think it depends on the publisher. I think if a publisher is a large general publisher, it's very hard to create a brand that at a publisher level, at a corporate level, that makes any sense because it's not coherent or consistent necessarily. I think that's then when the role of the imprints comes in, or the role of the sub-brands, which is why I think the part of the conversation around the business models and the model that Osprey have or other businesses have, where there's sub-brands that actually have a clear, meaningful
but doesn't make things confusing? I mean, in terms of marketing, like if you say, like Disney has a lot of sub-brands, but everything is Disney. And if, even if I were to say, I'm making this up, like Disney's next film is set in outer space, we all kind of have an idea generally what it's going to be, and whether you like it or not, you know that there's going to be that audience. So does it make sense if they also then start, promoting Miramax and Hollywood Films, which I know no longer exists, and Touchstone, but they've kind of really streamlined.
They have had a consistent approach to what movies they are after, and I would be very surprised if, for example, Star Wars or Marvel would carry the strong Disney branding, if any, for that matter. But I think if you look at the other studios talking about corporate branding, it's very rare that you'd, as a consumer, would go and watch a Universal movie or watch a Fox movie. You will go and watch a Disney movie because that means certain things, and they have branding and very clear meaning to that. So I think it depends on what your corporation stands for, and if Disney has a very clear, this is what we produce, this is what we don't produce, and in part, I would imagine that's what drove the getting rid of, setting off of Miramax. But Miramax, again, is a very good example, because often when you speak to publishers, they say, well, certain models work when there's genre publishing, so military history or whatever. But actually, if you look at Miramax, it's not really genre, anything from comedy to action to whatever, but it was a certain style, a certain feeling, and very, very clearly branded. So I think it just depends on the nature of the publisher, where it makes sense or doesn't make sense. Right. But it has a lot of value to bring, because otherwise you've got not much to help a consumer or a reader find you beyond the author and the power of the retailer to merchandise that product. Right.
And brand actually in your world, in advertising as well, or agency world, actually means something quite a little bit different too than the way I've been talking about branding too, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. I think ultimately, to Oliver's point, it's about a promise, and a promise that you deliver against. I think that's what is the case with most brands, but it's also the longevity of those brands. So actually sticking with that brand, rather than speaking to somebody at the break. In some ways, publishing is not dissimilar to the record business. Every single new book is a new business or a new product or a new launch, and it's very hard to make campaign marketing, for example, make sense. To be honest, because you're not spending a huge amount of money, so you're not going to have a huge amount of impact. And you have to spend that money again and again and again. Whereas actually, if you have a brand that has some overarching meaning, then you're building on top of something over time, and with that being an imprint brand. But again, that brand needs to be meaningful. It needs to actually help somebody find something. But what's interesting in the advertising space is that so many of the advertisers we talk to are, jumping on this bandwagon called content marketing. They want to tell stories. They want to get content out there. And many of them are extending their brands, the business that Oliver is in, into other areas. So Coke fashion label in South America, for example. So there's lots of opportunities, I think, for publishers to work with advertisers who have brands, who have communities.
And how exactly?
By partnering to create publishing imprints, for argument's sake. If Coke, for example, have a huge push to fashion and music because of the particular demographic that they're after, there's no reason why Coke couldn't launch a fashion imprint. There is no reason why, I shared this earlier, there's a large shoe chain in Germany that create kids' comic books and retail them and sell them through their shoe shops. So there's no reason why brands can't be publishers. They are becoming publishers. They're just becoming not great publishers because it's not the business that they do. Whereas this is a room full of people who are in publishing and are looking for, I believe, should be looking for brands to cut through amongst the rest.
And what do you guys think about, in terms of branding and brands and our corporate identities? Is this, in my mind, very personally, I feel that the corporate brand is very important, obviously being curators. And the idea that a consumer brand like Amazon could be someone who is a place that consumers go to because they know that brand, they know I can go there, get something, find anything I want. Is this a missed opportunity for publishers? And if so, sort of what could we have done, or what should we do to kind of get back into that space? Do you guys have any thoughts on that from what you do on a day-to-day basis?
I think, there's a kind of consistency that maybe is missing. And I think using the analogy of the BBC as another industry that has that sort of tiered model of branding, what they do very well is they have this consistency across every different network and property, whether that's a consistent use of a kind of authoritative font or consistent use of spacing. But there's a kind of subtle consistency that allows somebody to move between those different properties and always have that sense of the overarching authority. So I think in the world of publishing, there is an opportunity to get that consistency, and I think there is a kind of a very subtle role around each of those layers of branding identity, and I think there's some work to do to sort of move that forward so that it becomes more useful to the end consumer.
And how would you say, like, what would that look like?
So I think a good analogy, again, looking at the BBC, pretty much any property that you look at will always have an overarching BBC stamp, whether it's CBeebies or whether it's Proms or Radio 1. There's always that mark of authority, a consistent use of fonts, spacing. I think some of those component parts, what they do is they just instill a set of values to the end consumer.
What do you think, Oliver, in terms of how you've dealt with entertainment companies? You've worked at the BBC as well. Is there anything that you feel, I guess, our cousins in other media industries do that we don't do, or any kind of advice? How are we different in terms of the way we approach branding and brand in general?
I think with BBC, a lot of their branding is also about extending their brand to other territories, and because of the way that they're set up. In terms of lessons that you could learn, I don't know. I almost think that they're going slightly the other way.
How so?
Well, for example, think about iPlayer. I wonder if everybody immediately thinks about iPlayer as BBC, or whether people go, is it on iPlayer? And also, I think sometimes some of the channel brands can melt away, particularly when you look at the kind of phenomenon of people watching TV on box sets and downloading everything all at once. You're kind of attracted to the content of the exact show, and I think the power of the channel brands is starting to recede.
Right.
I think to the point you're making about the channel brands, I think that's where the key difference is. I don't necessarily agree with the point you're making, Eric, about the corporate brand. I think it's rare that the corporate brand is worth investing in my opinion, because it doesn't actually mean anything to the consumer. It doesn't actually provide a consistent level of editorial or curation. It may have certain elements which are consistent because it happens to be the same.
But should it? I mean, is that just because of a failing, or is it something just to not even think about because it's more about the author brand or the series brand?
I think it depends on the legacy of the business. So if the business, if your catalogue is massive and your organizational structure is, Random House, for example, or whatever, I think that you're probably better off building a large set of sub-brands and forgetting about your catalogue brand, your corporate brand altogether, because it's just it happens to be brought to you by. I think if you're a startup in publishing, like a Nosy Crow or whatever, you have to do that because that's how you survive. That's how you build a community around your
You mean focus on your corporate brand?
You focus on a brand that means something, which happens to be, in their case, the corporate brand. So I think that if you're a startup, you don't have the luxury of having multiple brands. You only have one, and you build up.
But isn't it also about focus? I mean, I know what you're saying in terms of, nowadays, like let's say Penguin, for example, which is a consumer brand. But you're right, and people, although people have an emotional connection to it, a Penguin book can be anything from a real, mass market fiction to something very literary. Yeah. So it's difficult to kind of get your hands around what that exactly is.
I think you've got to. I think you've just got to, from my point of view, I think about what difference it makes to the consumer, what the objective is, and what action that the people can or take or not take based on what you're doing with your brand? Can you make a difference to a decision or?
I mean,
how
it
they
comes down
interact
to
with you?
sales, doesn't it? I mean,
Absolutely.
the whole idea of branding and spending money on branding has to do with growing the business, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, to Oliver's point, it's just, if you're thinking about, if somebody's saying you should build a brand, a corporate brand or whatever, is it going to make a difference, a meaningful difference to the next book sale? And if it doesn't, and I think that's where a corporate brand, certainly other corporate brands are investing in CRM systems and recommendations engines and all that kind of stuff. It's never going to be as good as Amazon's, in my opinion, because you're never going to outspend Amazon in terms of technology. So it can't be that. It needs to be something that they can put their finger on and say it's something that is meaningful. And if it doesn't make a meaningful difference, is it really worth doing? But I think it's important, back to your earlier slide around the if books quote, I think that to pull a product through the supply chain, so from getting it made through to getting it sold, I think there's a huge advantage and huge opportunity to build brands, curation brands, collection brands, imprint brands, whatever you want to call it, to help do that, to help build communities around it. Because otherwise, you are but the author brand and your relationship with that retailer, which is fine, but it ultimately means you get squeezed over time.
Right. But also, isn't it also just about, I mean, in terms of corporate brands, you could argue that, say, Oprah is a corporate brand.
Yep.
If she were to start, a sort of book, say a fiction, an ebook publisher, all her books would probably be, New York Times bestsellers.
I wouldn't say that Oprah's a corporate brand.
Isn't she both?
I'd say she leans more towards consumer.
What do you mean? So I guess, what's the difference between the two, would you say?
I'd categorise most people's understanding of a corporate brand as being more business to business.
Okay.
And I can't think of many other people that are more
fair
straight to
enough.
consumer than
Oprah. Or in the UK, Richard and Judy, which is something we talked about as, consumer brands, or I guess corporations that have become consumer brands that can help curate and help in discoverability, which I guess if we're talking about branding and how it ultimately leads to growing the business. Do you, I guess, we was told to leave some time for questions. We have about 10 minutes left. Anyone have any questions for the people on the panel?
A couple of questions over there.
Hi. Hello. I was just wondering if you could give me examples of publishing brands, whether that's author, imprint, where you think they've been successful in their brand strategy and why, and you're not allowed to answer with anything related to Penguin.
Let's go first.
I'm kind of immediately leaning towards Harry Potter and J.K. Rowling, because I think they're really good examples of. I was going to make this point just a minute ago, actually, that one of the things to consider in terms of thinking about branding and the complexity is where is the audience and what is it that the audience want. And I think around Harry Potter specifically, there's a real movement around that particular title. And I think there's a natural following around the author. And I think also this idea that there is that authority from the publisher, but it plays a kind of subtle, passive role.
In terms of examples that come to mind, I do think Lady Bird and the like are good examples, but they're penguins, so Mills and Boon, ultimately they mean something. You know what you're going to get, whether you like it or not. Osprey, I think the whole business, the whole kind of portfolio of brands that they have. Nat Geo, I think there's plenty of them out there. I think that they're, some people say a lot of them are genre-based. Again, I mentioned from the film example, Miramax, et cetera, et cetera. So I think they're out there, and they can be both genre-based publishing and non-genre-based publishing. Oliver?
Children's perspective, I guess Gruffalo at the moment is doing really, really well across all sorts of different product categories. I think Charlie and Lola
did very well for a long time.
Yeah. I mean, I would say too that I think that especially when it comes to entertainment brands that came from publishing, whilst, Harry Potter, Charlie and Lola, Gruffalo, there's loads of others have been really successful, there's a part of me that feels like, is it a failing on our industry that we didn't actually participate in the brand when it became big? We launched it, but then we handed it over to filmmakers, to TV people, to gaming companies, to consumer products, and just kind of left it. I mean, it's not really a question, but just sort of, for me, I feel like it's something that is a shame, and I think it looks like those of us a lot of us are actually starting to, look at brand in a bigger way and think about consumer products, think about TV, think about film, and participate directly in these exploitations, because when we build the brand from our books, it's a shame that we just then walk away, and once it becomes massive, we have nothing to do with it.
I think it might be partly because there are other industries that view intellectual property and the original conception, the original idea, as and then all of the elements, or all of the exploitations, as you say it, all of the exploitations as equally important. And I wonder if that's the case within publishing, where, or even actually TV, where the TV show is the most important thing, and everything else is considered secondary, even tertiary. And in publishing, the book, the story, the author is the most important thing. And to your point, as in your introduction, everything else is almost slightly not to be touched.
Yeah.
From a brand perspective, everything, and it goes back to this kind of idea of it being a promise, and in this case, a promise to the consumer. And from a brand perspective, everything from a pen to a T-shirt to a movie to a TV show to a series of books, however people want to enjoy their relationship with the brand, everything is equally as important.
Do you think there's scope for publishers to be bolder in creating curation brands? Because in a way, once you've got a successful author, publishers are getting much better at doing that, from uniform branding and rebrand, or uniform design and redesign of their series of books. But there's the whole mid-list, which is what everybody's particularly worried about. You sometimes do get in the States, particularly imprints that are built around an editor, for example. That editor is promoted to the consumers as the person who's created that list, and that's why you've talked about publishers being more subtle in there, but actually perhaps publishers should be much bigger and bolder about creating those sub-imprints that you've mentioned.
Right. Absolutely. I think that there is stacks of opportunities to do that, there's lots of interesting stuff happening, for instance, in the digital startup space, where people use celebrity to curate product, and you get celebrity that slots in every couple of months, and you get a new pack of stuff landing on your post every couple of months, and there's lots of different ways of curating, but I think it needs to be meaningful and ultimately help make that consumer's decision an easier one the next time around, that they'll default to your brand rather than to somebody else's. And it's not just in competitiveness within publishers, but again, ultimately, if you are an Amazon, or if you're a Tesco, or if you're any other retailer, and you have the choice of stocking a product that will mean something to the reader from day one versus not, then it's a huge difference. So I think there's lots of interesting stuff happening there. The one area I do bang on about a little bit sometimes is there's a lot of people out there, they're called big advertisers, big FMCG brands, that have brands, and they're looking desperately for stories to tell. And it's dirty, and it's the advertising world and all that kind of stuff. But they are, there's some that are out there that would make great creative partners with publishers, and a lot of them are retailers. They have people that come in and spend money with them. So there's also innovative distribution channels to be had there as well. So I do think that publishers personally need to be bolder, especially to kind of stand out in the world of lots of content and lots of powerful retailers.
Yep, I think publishers should be definitely bolder, and actually something you had said earlier about how Amazon is already doing it so well, there's no point in trying. I disagree, and I think that Amazon is a generalist, sort of curates a generalist kind of storefront, and brands like Osprey, which we keep talking about, and also maybe like DK or even Ladybird, these are Penguin, who really reach, in Mills and Boon, who reach a very sort of focused audience. I think there's still definitely an opportunity, and it's about focusing on the brand so that you get it's about discoverability, it's about being able to reach your consumer. I think another thing that we do as an industry is that, we may sell 3 million of one book that, say, is targeted at 40-year-old men, The next time we want to sell another book to 40-year-old men, we start over. There's no keeping of the data. There's no some kind of coordinated effort to kind of move someone along. And I think branding definitely helps with that, especially with sub-imprints like things like DK Osprey, et cetera, et cetera. Any other questions?
People keep talking about the rise of direct-to-consumer. Don't you think it's going to be more incumbent on publishers to create a brand if they're going to be selling directly to consumers?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's critical. I think it's as much important from the respect of publishers kind of competing and building that audience and having that direct communication with the end reader, as it is for the reader to get value from that.
Yeah, and I think especially with the rise of self-publishing websites, which are new brands in themselves, I think it'd be really interesting that, I don't think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's an agent, a literary agent who's a consumer brand yet. But that would be really interesting as well, to be a brand that everyone recognizes who can go direct, because obviously, it's much easier for them to actually get to the consumer as well. So I think, yes, given the direct-to-consumer access that everyone now has, I think every link in the old chain can be stronger if they focus on their branding, for consumers specifically. Anything else? All right, well, to wrap up.
There's one more question over there on the side.
Thanks, sorry. It's more a comment than to the previous discussion before last. I'm Hal Robinson, my company's Librios. It's a digital provider to publishers. But I've also been an advisor on the board of the British Interactive Media Association, which is the trade association for digital agencies, typically the smaller ones. And I think there is real potential for synergy at quite small scale, experimental ways between publishers and the smaller agencies. There's a lot both can learn. My impression is actually that many of the agencies don't really get content. They understand stories and narrative, but not content in the sense that the publishers do. Anyway, just a suggestion, but it's BIMA, British Interactive Media Association. I'm not involved with them anymore, but they're an interesting lot. Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, anything to kind of wrap up. So this is a room full of people in the publishing industry, or at least people who are interested in publishing. What advice would you give us about brands and our branding? Who wants to start?
I'll start. I think focus on objectives. It's not a nebulous thing, branding. It's really about talking to people, having a message. I think you've really just got to start with what you actually want to achieve. I mean, it sounds so painfully obvious, but branding and brands aren't a silver bullet to an objective. You've got to start with the objective and then work back from that.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think just one thing to add is to just stop for a minute and then really think about how the branding looks across the full landscape holistically across the whole organisation, and then start putting measures in place to have a plan ongoing, and to work out who owns that, and how it filters down across the organisation.
I guess my point is probably more around the question earlier, is just be bolder about it, be more creative about how you do it, if you're going to do it, whether that be series-based, partnering with people. There's lots of brands out. There's, that slide you put up, the second slide, there's so many brands out there that already exist. So just be a bit more creative and clever about partnering or doing stuff rather than just reinventing the wheel all the time.
Great. All right. Thanks very much.
Thank you.